Indo-China border, where visuals of a possible clash between the Indian and Chinese soldiers in Ladakh have surfaced from earlier this month. Now, these are visuals which show the Indian and Chinese troops at Pangong Tso Lake in Ladakh on the 15th of August. Now, the Indian External Affairs Ministry has confirmed that the clash did take place, and now just a day later, the visuals show as to what exactly happened. The video shows soldiers of the People's Liberation Army clashing with Indian troops on patrol in the area. The Chinese have long laid claim to the Pangong Tso Lake, but have officially denied that the clash took place. And also to discuss more on this, we are joined in by Mr. C.V. Ranganathan, who was a former ambassador to China and France. Mr. Ranganathan, a very good evening to you. These are some very disturbing visuals that we see of what is being said to be a confrontation between the Indian and Chinese troops at the Pangong Tso Lake. What do we make of these visuals?
Well, it is quite clear that such incidents are totally very provoking, and as far as our people are concerned, I'm sure that they have not indulged in any such provocative actions. So this is really very, very disturbing, and it goes quite against the grain of all that has been achieved in the relationship over the past few years.
Right. And also, Mr. Ranganathan, you were an ambassador to China as well. Now, Prime Minister Modi recently had said that this is, a border where not a single bullet had been fired in the last 4 decades. But in terms of what has been unfolding in the last 4 weeks, what we are seeing is that there is increasing belligerence on the part of China. It started off at Doklam, but now we are seeing this at Pangong Tso. How are we to read what the intentions of the Chinese dragon are at this point of time?
That I meant when I said earlier that this is totally unprovoked, and it is very difficult to explain, particularly in the light of what was also said by Prime Minister. There have been so many mechanisms devised to keep the border peaceful and tranquil. So it is very perplexing that those mechanisms are not being used and all these provocative actions are taking place.
And also, how should India react to this? How should India go ahead and register a protest? Because Pangong Tso is clearly a part of the Indian territory, and what we are essentially seeing is Chinese soldiers having come into Indian territory, which is then led, if one could so put it, into this form of a skirmish.
No, we have to keep up our exchanges through the talks should keep taking place, and that is it. We just need to show patience and sit it out.
We need to show patience and stick it out. And also, if I could just stay on this a little while longer, how do you see this confrontation progressing? We started off what happened in the case of Doklam. We saw similar kind of visuals that came in from Doklam of Indian and Chinese soldiers, virtually coming to blows with each other. And now this is played out very similar kind of visuals from the Pangong Tso Lake. How do you see this progressing further, sir?
I don't see it. I don't hope for it to progress any further on the same lines. What I'd like to see is an early resolution of all these disputes that you're talking about. Hello?
Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, I'm also told that we are also joined by Mr. Brahmachalani, who's also a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Chalani, now this is something very, very disturbing. This is a development that we believe has taken place on the 15th of August, at a time when India was, of course, celebrating its 70th Day of Independence. This is what has happened at the Pangong Tso Lake. how do you read this development that has taken place, sir?
As far as the incident at Lake Pangong is concerned, it was a deliberate attempt by the PLA to intrude into Indian held area in that lake area and also deliver a message to India on its Independence Day. But I think we need to keep in mind that what the PLA is doing, it's trying to probe India's defenses at various points along the long Himalayan border. It's trying to find opportunities to strike possibly at Indian weaknesses in defenses. And therefore, India has to stay very vigilant because China is repeatedly warning India of dire consequences. This is the type of warnings China had delivered to India before launching its attack in 1962, and similar warnings were issued to Vietnam before China attacked Vietnam in 1979. So we have to be very careful. We should not be downplaying the Chinese threat. Some Indians are tending to discount the Chinese threat. That would be a big mistake.
Actually, the External Affairs Ministry, if I could just stop you there, the External Affairs Ministry has said that the Pangong Tso incident should not be linked to other happenings, effectively referring to the standoff that is taking place over Do Klam. Do you think we'd be making a mistake if we do not connect the dots here and look at the Chinese intentions? Because on the one hand, we are battling them at Do Klam, where China is effectively accusing India of having infringed upon its territory. But here, what has clearly happened is that the Chinese troops have marched inside Indian territory, and this is the standoff that has taken place at the Pangong Tso Lake.
We need to connect the dots. We have to look at the larger picture. It would be a big mistake to look at every episode independently of the other events. And I think the MEA is making a mistake by sending the wrong message. For example, on Friday in its briefing, it finally disclosed after 2 months that China has stopped providing India hydrological data on the rivers that flow to India from Tibet. As part of the bilateral agreement between the two countries, China is obligated to supply hydrological data to India every year from May 15 to October 15 so that India can actually have reasonable information as regards floods. For example, to develop flood warning and flash flood modeling, India needs this kind of data.
Right, Mr. Brahmacharya, if I could just interrupt you there, because meanwhile we're also being joined in, I'm told, by Einar Tangen. Mr. Tangen, this is what we are seeing at a time when both countries ideally should have been making efforts to try and bring about a sort of de-escalation after what was happening at Do Klam. What we see is this another incident where the Chinese and Indian troops are having a bit of a scuffle inside India's territory at Pangong Tso Lake. What exactly do you think are China's intentions with this? Mr. Einar Tangen, if you could hear us. Right, we seem to have lost the line with Mr. Einar Tangen. He is a strategic affairs expert from Beijing. Meanwhile, we still have Mr. Brahmacharya. Mr. Chelny, you were making a point about whether this incident should be downplayed or whether dots need to be connected to look at and sense in some ways the intention of the Chinese dragon. What should be India's response going forward from here, Mr. Chelny?
Afford to take any chances. Only in India, fully prepared to counter and defeat aggression, can deter China from initiating a military conflict. So it's very important for India to be fully prepared, to be fully ready, and to clearly convey to China that if it were to attack India, it would suffer major reverses. Only that can deter China from attacking India.
Right. And meanwhile, we are also joined in by Mr. Phunchok Stobdan, who is a diplomat and also a foreign policy expert. Professor Stobdan, this is the latest standoff that we are seeing between Indian and Chinese troops, and it is this time round taking place inside India's territory. how concerned should India be about the Chinese intentions in this case?
Well, it's quite serious. It's quite serious. It's happening on the Finger Point 5 on the bank of Pangong Lake, on the northern side of the Pangong Lake, which is very close inside Indian territory. From there, I think another 15 kilometers is our territory to the east of Finger 8. We call it Sirjap area, where actually we have about 93 square kilometer disputed territory with China there. And this is a very, very normal thing to have this kind of a thing, but not stone pelting.
Right.
This is something very new. This is very ugly, and it's happening for the first time. I don't know the motives behind why this Pangong Lake incident is now occurring. Only thing I could remember is that on the 5th of last month, the Dalai Lama's Prime Minister hoisted a Tibetan national flag right there, opposite of this place where the incident is taking place. Probably that was the provocation, or whether it is taking place in the context of the larger environment that has been now vitiated because of the Doklam incident, one doesn't know. But quite clearly, this is a case of PLA's theatrics. It's a war campaign, of media war campaign,
Right.
information warfare campaign, which should not happen again. I only feel that in our CBM with China, India-China confidence building measures,
Absolutely.
include not using stone pelting, not using bullets or firing at each other.
Absolutely, indeed. Now,
Don't-
the resolution for a conflict like this is not by bullets, not through scuffles in this manner, but now I'm being told that we are joined in by Mr. Anna Tangen from Beijing, who is also a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Tangen, this is the latest scuffle that we see that has taken place between the Indian and the Chinese soldiers, and this has taken place at Pangong Tso Lake, which is clearly inside India's territory. What does this say of Chinese intentions here, Mr. Tangen?
Well, I don't think you should read China's, Beijing's intentions by a group of, let us say, highly wound up young men who are, according to the Indian colonel who reported the incident first, he believed they had lost their way, and because they had done so, they thought they were on Chinese territory and that the Indians had come onto theirs. So these scuffles do break out. As I agree with your previous commentator, the thing is that they are not using guns. It's not resulting in a loss of, unlike the situation between India and Pakistan. So I think that is something that we need to take in stride in just around Indian National Bank.
Do you honestly feel convinced that this is a mistake on the part of Mr. Tangen? If I could just interrupt you there, do you honestly feel convinced that this is only a mistake on part of young, youthful soldiers, that they have strayed into Indian territory and then are having a scuffle of this nature? Is this just a mistake, just a blip that has not got any other ramifications?
Well, neither you nor I are there, and you'll note when you look at the video that there are no lines demarcating saying clearly this is India and this is China. We're talking about cow pastures and areas in very remote areas, and it is very easy for both sides to make incursions accidentally. I don't think that it would be to Beijing's interest to try to bait India by such a juvenile display of kind of young men pushing and hitting each other with rocks. This is not something that happens. If it was going to be a military incursion, they would have used rifles and bullets. Note, they did not. So I think there is a way to move past this. It's unfortunate that the emotional part of this continues to be the centerpiece as opposed to the rational part, which is neither country can afford or want a war.
You know, you're trying to downplay this incident. You're saying that, you know, this has to be a mistake. But if I could also point out the context in which a scuffle of this nature has broken out, we saw a very, a video that has not been accepted very nicely by Indians, where in many ways the standoff at Doklam is being projected as something which India has done. But this is clearly an incident where the Chinese soldiers have come inside India. You say that there are no borders there, but the fact of the matter is, it still is fairly easy to make out the distinction between as to what is Indian territory and the Chinese territory at the Pangong Tso Lake, because this is happening right adjacent to the banks of the lake there.
All I can tell you is I was not there, that the Indian colonel indicated that he thought that these Chinese troops were lost and that the scuffle ensued because they thought the Indians had come onto their territory.
Right.
I don't think that Beijing is in the habit, as I said, of ordering people to throw rocks. That does not make a lot of sense. Emotionally, people are being carried away. I think it's much better if we start looking at this rationally. Yes, I am downplaying it because I don't think that sensationalizing these types of things is going to lead to anything good.
Right, you do not believe sensationalizing will lead to anything good. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ainar Tangen, for joining us from Beijing and giving us your inputs. But people who are going to be watching this would say that this should not be treated as an isolated incident, and perhaps, India should perhaps be on guard, because this is happening right adjacent to the Pangong Tso Lake, clearly inside the Indian territory. It is a little childish. It's a scuffle with bare fists and hands, and it's absurd that the two armies of India and China should be in a standoff in this manner. Thank you very much indeed to all the gentlemen, Mr. Ainar Tangen, Brahma Chelni and others who joined in for this discussion.